Hey guys, so today we're talking about the Cold War. We're going to talk about what happens in order to lead to the Cold War and the main events and the very beginning of the Cold War. Remember, before I get into all of this, the Cold War isn't something we go and fight somewhere. It is like this period of high tension between the Soviet Union and the United States over capitalism and communism and their beliefs behind that, but there really isn't a moment like we go and fight the Soviet Union or we go and fight Russia, because that's pretty much what the Soviet Union is at this point, or any of that. Okay, so we start off with the Yalta Conference. Sorry, slight interruption. Mr. Luce needs something. So the Yalta Conference. So the Yalta Conference, we're going to have the big three, which is Churchill, the Prime Minister. Here we go. The Prime Minister of England. We have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is the President of the United States. And then we have Joseph Stalin, who is the dictator of the Soviet Union. They're going to meet in February 1945. And as they meet there, they're going to decide to create the United Nations. And in the United Nations, they're going to have what's called the Security Council. And they are going to, the Security Council is going to have permanent seats within the United Nations, and they're kind of like the governing head of the United Nations, more or less. And that is going to include the big three, plus France and China. They're also going to discuss the fates of the nation in Eastern Europe. They talk about how they want to divide it up between the big three. They want to make sure everyone's like established and good to go, and like we can get back on their feet after World War II. You're going to see that Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Churchill are going to agree that Poland should be in the Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, but they're like, hey, you know, you can have that buffer between you and Germany, like it's totally fine, because obviously like it didn't work out so well the first time when they invaded Stalingrad and all that. But you have to agree, Stalin, to have free and unfettered, meaning you can't mess with it, elections held in those border nations, including Poland. So like it can be in your sphere of influence, but if they decide to elect and not be in the Soviet Union and have you as their leader, like that's cool. You gotta respect that, right? Well, that's then going to lead us into the Potsdam Conference. So at the Potsdam Conference, Truman, Harry Truman, this guy, is going to be there instead of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because Franklin Delano Roosevelt dies April of 1945. And the Potsdam Conference is held July of 1945. And Truman's going to come hard on wanting to stand up to Stalin, because at this point the war is over in Europe and we're focusing purely on the Pacific. And Stalin is showing his true colors, if you will, or we're just really seeing him for what he is, the fact that, like, you know, we've won the war and now we're focusing on trying to rebuild Europe and, you know, get everything better, and the Soviet Union and their insanity is no longer looking so great. So they are going to be unwilling to negotiate. In July of 1945, the Potsdam Conference, free elections are held in Finland, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Czechoslovakia, which used to be a country, and it broke up into different countries now. But Poland and Romania are still going to be occupied by the Red Army, by the Soviet Union. And the Americans are like, hey, like, you had kind of a free election in some of those places, but not all of them. Like, not the ones you really want to hold on to. And so that's not cool, man. And so this disagreement is going to start to pave the way for the division between the East and the West. The East meaning the Soviet Union, communism, dictatorship, and all of that. And the West meaning Western Europe / the United States, who stand for capitalist, mostly capitalist ideas and democracy and republics and things like that, that the Soviet Union is not standing for. So you start to see this division because Joseph Stalin just isn't willing to play the game. Okay, so that leads us then into the containment strategy. So the containment strategy is going to be created by George Kennan, who is a diplomat. And he's like, you know what? We just have to keep the communists and Soviet Union where it is. That, you know, where it is right now in 1946, let's just like put a bubble over it and just keep it in there, contain it, so it doesn't spread, so it doesn't go everywhere else. And kind of like quarantining it, right? And so there's going to be the four main strategies into the, well, the three pillars, because I guess the Berlin airlift is a strategy within the containment sphere, but like, so our three main pillars are the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And then you also have the Berlin Airlift. That's going to be kind of a piece that goes into the whole containment ideology, but isn't, I wouldn't say like a pillar of it. Okay, so we have the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine is going to provide economic military aid that is threatened by communism or totalitarian ideologies. So pretty much Greece and Turkey are having issues with the people there are very enticed by communism, and there's fear of rebellion. There's fear of that happening. So Truman says, hey, we'll provide you money and we'll provide you the backup, the military backup that you need in order to make sure that doesn't happen, in order to make sure you don't turn communist. You're also going to see NATO, that next pillar that I talked about, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Still talking, sorry. So my hands are so dry and I couldn't focus. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it's still around today, although we aren't nearly as focused as fighting communism anymore. This is going to be a military alliance amongst the countries of Western Europe and North America. So all those countries in blue are NATO countries on here. And they are going to be protecting members from a possible attack from the Soviet Union. And it's formed in 1949. And it's members of like democracies and things like that. And they're going to, help each other out. That if something bad happens, if you have a communist attack or something like that, they can call all your NATO buddies up. But NATO doesn't have an attack until 9/11. So it took a long time for any of that to happen. There wasn't any major attacks that caused issues. Okay, so then we have the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is the communist version of NATO, and they are going to be created in 1955. And this big country here is Russia, but all of this is the Soviet Union. So when I talk about the Soviet Union, it is pretty much Eastern Europe. It is gigantic at this point, although China obviously is not part of the Soviet Union. So just like Eastern Europe over into China is the Soviet Union. Okay, so the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is going to be created in 1955, and it is a Soviet response to NATO. And pretty much the idea is like, hey, things are going great over here, and if NATO tries to attack us, we're going to help each other out, even though like they're one giant country, so they would help each other out anyways. But it's going to include other communist countries that might want to help each other out, like China, and be a part of it. Okay, so speaking of China, China is going to turn communist, and they're still communist today. We use that term very loosely because no country in human history has actually ever achieved communism, because communism, as Karl Marx proposed it and theorized it, it should be a pure democracy, and China definitely is not. Okay, so in China, you are going to see that 1945, conveniently, as World War II is ending, and the Soviet Union is supposed to be like going through China to be pushing back the Japanese and helping us to fight the Pacific. They're just going to stop over in China while China's having a whole deal, and they're just going to help encourage the communist side as they're going through China. So China's going to have a brutal civil war. You're going to see the communist forces, you'll learn about this more next year in AP World. The communist forces are going to be led by Mao Zedong, this guy right here, who I learned this summer. His body is still preserved, like Vladimir Lenin's body in Russia. So you can go visit Mao's body if you want to, even though it seems super creepy, although apparently it's not, as well preserved as Vladimir Lenin's body. Mao Zedong's body is like having some issues, so you gotta take it out every now and then and like, I don't know, spritz it down with zombie stuff. Anyways, so it's gonna be communism versus nationalism, and this civil war is gonna go on for 4 years, 1945 to 1949. The United States is going to give the nationalist side money. They're gonna give them $2 billion to try to save China. And ultimately, they're not gonna be able to. The U.S. cuts off aid, because it's not going well, and Mao is going to be victorious. Mao then is going to have what he calls the Great Leap Forward, and just like hellacious times in Chinese history. I mean, they're going to have starvation all across the nation as they're trying to teach peasants different skills of industrialization, and it's just like so bad, so bad. And like they're gonna have purges of people, and it's just rough days in China for sure. But they're buddies, they're best buddies with the Soviet Union. Truman is going to be blamed for losing China, that, you know, containment, it doesn't work in that instance, and you're going to see that it's going to be seen as a failure on the United States part. So this ideology and kind of main government type has continued on in Chinese history. So even the Soviet Union has fallen, obviously, at this point, because Russia is Russia now rather than the Soviet Union. China's, you know, still going on with being China. I know you guys read 1984 in English, and this is so, like, China is very 1984, very much Big Brother. They like have surveillance of people, they like know what everyone's doing like all the time. It's super creepy. But there isn't as much information that is very honestly out at this point about Mao Zedong, because just like the Soviet Union, they aren't allowed to write bad things about the government, no matter how old it is. Otherwise, you are going to go to a re-education camp or you're going to die. And so there isn't as much information about him, but I feel like it's very telling to note that they put this gigantic golden statue up in like the rural part of China. That's the word I was looking for. And, you know, to honor Mao Zedong, whatever. And the farmers there literally tore it down because they hate Mao Zedong that much. So they may not say it, but like low key, they're like, Mao Zedong, no thank you. So China's doing a thing. It's not going to look so good for us as the United States trying to contain communism. Okay, so then we get to the Korean War. The Korean War, we're going to see, again, a struggle between communism and capitalism/democracy. So at the end of World War II, Soviet Union and the United States are going to jointly occupy Korea, because all these different provinces and countries and all that had been colonized and taken over and brutally ruled over during World War II by Japan. And so we divide Korea on the 38th parallel. So that means like the parallel lines across the globe. So we divide it. And you're going to see that as we are dividing the nation, that we're going to be supporting different governments and different sides of things. The Soviets are going to support Kim Il-sung, who is the grandfather, the current leader of North Korea. And we are going to back a more democratic leader in the South. And then you're going to start to see the North and the South start fighting because they want to be all, you know, back together and put back on their feet in one whole country. And they both want to own how it goes. They both want to be the ones who are going to decide the government and decide the kind of economic fate of the country moving forward. The United States is going to militarily get involved. We're going to send troops to go fight in Korea. This is very little known, like talked about war. Lasts for about 2 years, and we are going to fight in a variety of different places where we have major battles that go honestly north all the way to South Korea, and ultimately it is going to end in a truce on the line of the 38th parallel. So pretty much we're going to agree to have North Korea be North Korea South, then South Korea will be able to be free and do what they want. So the 38th parallel is this like no man's land between the two sides. This is where the DMZ is, if you've ever heard about that, the demilitarized zone, where it's literal, like, I think it's like a mile and from north to South Korea, that they just like have nothingness, where they have like no buildings, none of that. Well, I mean, where buildings used to be are still there, although some of it has been torn down, and they have that area where they have like the meeting headquarters. That's where Donald Trump went this past summer and met with the leader of North Korea. But you're going to see that they are going to go on to very different paths, very different ways of life, and that's why we support South Korea so much today. We still have a bunch of troops in South Korea, military operations that are there. They're supportive against North Korea, and North Korea being North Korea, even though they're not as powerful as what they say they are. Okay, so communism. So we're going to talk about this more in class, but I want to talk about what communism is so that you can kind of create your hypothesis of why the United States is so fearful of communism. Okay, so I like to think of this as a continuum. Oh, wow, that's a really great line. We are going to have capitalism over here off to the right, and then we're going to have communism way off to the left here, okay? And then somewhere, like, not quite the middle, but like more on this side of things, we're going to have socialism, which I know is a word that gets thrown around a lot. Socialism and communism are not the same thing. So capitalism. Capitalism is what you know here in the United States today. Capitalism is a free market. That is a free enterprise. That if you want to go start and make an app, you can, as long as it falls within whatever, I don't know, platform you're using, right? And people who want to go buy it and you make money off it, that's great. That's fantastic. That's capitalism, baby, right? And if you fail, that's your fault. You didn't respond accurately to supply and demand. But if you do great, that's amazing. Like, that's how it goes. There's classes in a capitalist society. There's really rich people. There's really poor people. And that's just, it weeds out kind of the strong and the weak in a capitalist society. Socialism is kind of a step towards communism, but it also still has a hand in a capitalist ideology. So you're going to see that most things are still privately owned, like businesses, like all the grocery stores and whatever. Still going to be privately owned. That if you decide that you want to go buy 3 pounds of bacon, you can. No one can stop you if that's how you want to spend your paycheck. In a social society, though, you're going to see that they have higher taxes because they are paying for things that are owned by the government, and those things are things that have been deemed for the public good, things like healthcare. So like in Canada or the United Kingdom, where they have a nationalized healthcare system, that'd be a socialist program. Or education, things of that nature, where they're government owned, they're government operated, rather than it being a private industry and like you paying to go to the hospital and all of that. Like, it's just all covered by those taxes that you pay. So it's like kind of a little bit of government owned, but still a little bit privately owned. Then you have communism off here to the left. Communism, as I've already stated, has never actually been achieved in human history as of yet, and it should be a complete democracy. But humans are too power hungry to make that happen. And also, I'm going to argue that and if you're sitting there with like communist beliefs and you want to come in here and debate with me, you know what, you go for it. Let's do it. I'm going to argue that biologically humans are wired to want more stuff in order to survive, because the person, the animal with the most stuff is the one that survives on to the next day, passed on their DNA and their genes and all that. So I really feel like communism kind of fights against those natural tendencies, and that's part of the reason why communism has had some trouble in the past in succeeding. So communism, everything is government owned. The school, the bank, the grocery store, the place where you buy your clothes, everything's government run. So think of everything being run by the MVA. You can imagine how happy of a world that would be. So pretty much the government says like, hey, you're really good at doing blah, 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 and you are going to go work doing blah, blah, blah. And rather than getting paid, rather than you making, you know, so much money in a paycheck, you just work that job, and then we give you what you need. We have decided that you need a new pair of shoes every 6 months, and you can go down to the shoe depot and, you know, everything will be taken care of, and you just go pick up your pair of shoes and that's it. That is ultimately how communism should work, but didn't really work that way in the Soviet Union. They had some like overproduction and underproduction of certain items. Like they would have like mountains of shoes, but not enough medical stuff. Like it was just insane. And people's needs weren't being met there in the beginning, for sure in the Soviet Union, and you saw that in China as well, that it should be a system in which you work as you're able and you get what you need. So if you're a 97-year-old grandpa who can't work, that's okay. You don't have to worry about that because society will take care of you. That you're still going to have money and medical care and all that all that's going to be done. That you don't have to worry about, your retirement, your Social Security, any of that, or a family member taking care of you, because there should be like money, even though it's not money, like this system, the government will take care of you. However, that has not happened in human history. Okay, so now for your analysis question, I want you to theorize yourself. Like, why is the United States so fearful of communism? Like, what is so scary about this? What is so like unnerving that we look at it and we're like, this is just too much for us? Like, why do we react in that way? If you have questions, please do not hesitate to sign up for Key Time right over there, to come in before or after school, to write your question down on your homework paper, or to just ask it in class because someone else might have the same question as you. I hope you enjoyed this beautiful lecture.